Welcome to the U of M Healthy Aging Series, the Art and Science of Healthy Aging. Our session today is entitled LGBT Older Adults, Closing the Gap on Health Disparities. My name is Karen Bantel, and I'm a moderator with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, OLLI, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Planning Committee and the programs that helped to make this series possible. They include the U of M Geriatrics Department, the Turner Senior Wellness Program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, Silver Club Memory Programs, the Turner African American Services Council, the Institute of Health Policy and Innovation, and the National Poll on Healthy Aging. Our format today is for approximately a 1-hour presentation from our speaker, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A with the audience. So please make sure that you put your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom right of your screen, and I will do my best to get to them all in the last 30 minutes. Also, there is a closed captioning function, I believe, but actually I'm not seeing it, so I'm going to not mention that. If you're having a technical problem, please put your question into the chat function and we will try to respond to you as quickly as possible. So I would like to now introduce our speaker, Judy Lewis. Judy is a certified LGBT older adult trainer for the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging. She co-founded the Jewish Gay Network of Michigan and served as its first executive director. In 2010, she co-founded the LGBT Older Adult Coalition, which became a national SAGE affiliate, SAGE Metro Detroit, in 2015. She is currently the Training and Education Manager for SAGE Metro Detroit, traveling statewide to provide workshops, training, and programs for professional care providers, administrators, and students in medicine, nursing, and social work. Judy has been a keynote speaker for various conferences, including the Alzheimer's Association statewide, the HIV/STI conference, Area Agency on Aging statewide conference, and Mental Health and Aging conference. So welcome, Judy. Thank you so much for participating in our session today, and I'll see you at the Q&A.
Thank you, Karen. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you. And I want you to know that I'm even cuter in life than I am in my picture. So but anyway, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I hope that we will have some fun while we work together. All right, I'm sharing my screen, but I can't see it. Can everyone see my screen? Because I'm not able to. Wait a minute.
Judy, we can see your screen, but I think you'd have to hit the PowerPoint icon at the bottom of your screen.
You know, I'm 74 years old, and the fact that I even know that there is a PowerPoint icon on the bottom of the screen, I find fabulous. So thank you, Jennifer. Slideshow from the beginning. How's that? Okay.
Looks good, Judy.
Thank you. So we're here today to talk about a gap in health disparities for the LGBT older adults. And Karen was so gracious in explaining who I am. I wanted you to know that all of this work that I'm doing only started in 2010. I was, as she mentioned, the executive director of the Jewish Gay Network. I had received a grant allowing for 4 programs dealing with LGBT older adults. And I had this really dear friend, I still do, I hope, Jay Kaplan, who is an attorney for the ACLU, and he's the LGBT project attorney. So I figured, okay, I'll go down. He must know a lot of people. I'll get somebody that can talk about medicine and somebody who can talk about financial, and this should be pretty easy. So I did. I went down there and he said, not only don't I know anyone, But let me tell you some horrible stories, which he did, unfortunately, about people having their clothing taken away at nursing homes, about people being evicted from their residences, about being harassed by workmen who might have come into their apartments or their homes, just awful stories. And so we decided, the two of us, that we would go out to the LGBT Community Center, Affirmations in Ferndale, and talk to their executive director, and that hopefully she could give us some insight. And her answer was pretty much the same, that not only did she not know anyone that she could refer me to, each day older adults were calling and saying, I'm about to move to an older adult community. Please take me off your mailing list. Please lose my name. And by the way, I have pictures and mementos. I'm willing to give all of it away. If no one wants it, I'm going to burn it, because I'm afraid of someone coming into my apartment and seeing something that might lead them to believe that I am LGB and or T and hurt me, or the consequences. My neighbors might not talk to me. And we discovered that where bullying went on in younger adults or young people, teenagers, they were able to graduate from high school and move away. But for older adults who were also being bullied and harassed and all, this was probably their last go-to place. And as a result, they didn't want any aggravation. They didn't want any problems or whatever. What finally got me involved in starting this organization was when a woman called me and said, I'm about to move into a fairly expensive senior living community, and I want to give away all of my materials, all of my mementos, and do you know anyone? You know people in the community. Do you know anyone? I said, but why would you want to do that? She said, well, from now on, I'm 80 years old. I'm no longer a lesbian. I'm a bridge player. And I said, how's that going to work for you? She said, I told all of the people I know not to visit me. I have decided that I am not going to associate with anyone that I previously did. I'm going to make new friends. I'm going to play bridge. I'm going to live out the rest of my life. And I don't want any hassles. I don't want to lose any sleep over this. So Kat and Jay and I got together and I told them the story, and they said, we need to do something about this. And as a result, we went to the area agencies on aging in our Detroit metro area, and I went to Alzheimer's and to the AARP, and I told them these stories, and they came together with us and sat at a table, and we talked about, now what? What do we do? Where do we go from here? I was able to find people who knew people and who were able to fulfill the requirements of the grant, but it certainly was a long road to hoe. We really needed to do some serious work. So from 2010 until now, a little over a decade, we have grown and developed from having absolutely no care providers who had anything in their policy or any way of disclosing that they were allies or that they would be accountable. We now have a 32-page resource guide that you can find at our website, so that if somebody is looking for a doctor or an attorney or some kind of care provider, if you're looking to talk to the Area Agency on Aging, if you're involved in the Turner Center, they have signed a statement of inclusion saying that they will be open and affirming. That didn't exist 10 years ago. It has a negative impact on people when they are constantly in a state of stress and are always worried about what to do now and who can I talk to and how much can I say. So this is important because Today's 65 and up came of age when it was dangerous to be open as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and or transgender. People may remember, if you're an older adult, people having electric shock treatments in inpatient mental health clinics or hospitals, people being sent to hospitals because they were gay, some people having lobotomies, people being imprisoned, or it wasn't just that your family kicked you out, family and community exclusion. It wasn't just that your parents made you leave. Sometimes you realize that for the sake of your parents and your siblings, it was important to leave because your neighbors would otherwise maybe ostracize them, maybe do damage to the house or something. Your father or mother might be fired from their job because they had a child who was GLBT, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. So sometimes it was a matter of leaving home in order for your family to survive. And then, of course, it was the physical and the verbal violence. Now, that was back then, but why is it important today? Well, first of all, violence still exists. I belong to an organization called MIAC. It's the Michigan organization that deals with hate crimes. And it appears that violence against LGBT people ranks as one of the most frequent hate crimes. And in fact, in 2015, and unfortunately we don't have much more beyond that, 1 in 5 of all hate crimes targeted on an individual due to their LGBT identity. That's the 3rd ranking behind race and ethnicity and religion. And most LGBT older adults remember having some kind of experience or heard about someone having some kind of experience with consequences when they were growing up, or even unfortunately recently. So it's really important that we do something to create a safe space for people who are different, who are other. All of us remember, or could remember if we really thought a little bit about it, being in a situation where we felt other. Your first night away at camp when you were little. Your birthday, going to a birthday party where you didn't know anyone. It was a cousin and the cousin was the only one you knew there. Walking in alone into that situation. There's an otherness. There's a feeling of strange, being a stranger. And it's really important that we honor the stranger. So I want to play a little bit of a game with you. On the next slide that I'm about to show you, there's like 5 or 6 questions. And
Hey, Judy.
yes, ma'am.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Before you continue, and hi, everybody. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jennifer. I'm the one who sends all of those emails to you. If you go to the bottom of your screen, Judy, I think if you click on the More button with the 3 little dots, there should be an option to get rid of that bar. I think that it is hide floating meeting controls. Pull that down, and where it says 2 more down.
Names of anime. Oh, I see.
Click that and let's see if that gets rid of those boxes. Okay. Well, it got rid of the 1. Now you have 2 black.
You know what I can do? I can do this.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. All right, you're all set. Please continue.
Okay. Can you see me though? Along with seeing my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I better keep smiling, huh? Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, so there are these 5 questions. I was going to ask everyone to raise their hand if any of these questions made you feel uncomfortable. I was told by 2 very wonderful women not to do that because there were so many of you. So I will just simply say to you that having asked the questions before, nearly everyone is uncomfortable with one of the questions. So here we go. What's your role in your organization? How long have you worked in your organization? What's your income? How old are you? And will you speak to a group of 200 strangers? All of us have something that makes us uncomfortable. And sometimes what we need to do is do it often enough that it becomes less uncomfortable. But we also need to know why you're asking the question. What are you going to do with the answers? And why is it important to me that I follow along with whatever it is you're asking me to do? So hopefully today, I'm going to equip you with the tools and knowledge that will help you appreciate the culture and the needs of LGBT older adults and identify those best practices for inclusion. And quite frankly, my number one goal is to raise an army of allies. I believe that most people are not anti-gay, are not anti-people. They just don't know how to engage, or they don't even think about it. It's not part of your wheelhouse. You don't know that you know someone who is LGBT and or T. So today I'm going to suggest to you that somebody in your life, whether it's casual or more, is gay, lesbian, bisexual, and or transgender. And it's important that we work in their behalf. So we're going to listen for understanding. And I'm going to suggest that what happens here doesn't necessarily stay here. If you hear a story or I mention something that you can use elsewhere, by all means do that. But if somebody happens to put in chat something that identifies someone, let's not identify people, because that disclosing others is not what we're here for. And always, please assume good intentions. These have been conversations that have been very difficult. As I say, when I was growing up, we never would have talked about something like this. We wouldn't have talked about race. We wouldn't have talked about people of different religions. It was just assumed everybody was white and Christian, and that men did certain things and women did certain things, because I grew up in the 50s and it was a very structured type of upbringing. Nowadays, we are having conversations that are not structured. And that's good news and bad news. The good news is we're getting to know each other finally. And we're discovering that the light isn't just on or off. It isn't just yes or no. It isn't just up or down. There's a rheostat involved. There's a continuum. So hopefully today we'll be able to explore that a little bit more. So before we get started, there are two glossaries. There's the glossary for the young adults and young people, and there's the glossary or dictionary for older adults. Older adults have a dictionary of, I don't know, this is it: lesbian, gay, bisexual, same gender loving, which is new. It's from the African American or Black community, and it means lesbian, gay, bisexual. Transgender, another new word, cisgender. Transgender is a person who does not identify with their gender at birth. The gender was assigned by a doctor, and the doctor probably looked at the genitalia, said this is more pronounced than that, or this shows that, so and assigned the gender. Now we know that based on DNA and chromosomal studies, that people can be born with 6 fingers, blue eye and a brown eye, genitalia that indicate one gender, but internal organs that may indicate another. So transgender, do not identify with the gender to which you were assigned at birth. But cisgender is that you do identify with the gender assigned at birth. Again, that word didn't exist in my day. Non-binary is another new word. At one point, light was on or off, up or down. Now we have a population that feels that they are neither male exclusively or female exclusively, that they fall into different places on the continuum. And they have chosen non-binary as the word that they use in order to describe themselves. Then there's sexual orientation and gender identity. My daughter said, you have to be the most boring person in the world. Why don't you just show them a picture? So I'm showing you a picture, which describes all of what I just said. A continuum, who we think we are, gender identity, who we love, who we're attracted to, sexual orientation. Sex is the genitalia. And then the fourth one that we didn't talk about is gender expression. And that's a cultural thing, and it's local to us. If you are in Scotland and you're waiting for a bus and you see a man in a kilt, most people are not even noticing it because it's a more common phenomena. If you're in downtown Detroit and a man's walking down the street wearing a kilt, chances are there are going to be a considerable number of people that will be looking at him. Because culturally, we don't see a lot of men in kilts. So gender expression is how you dress, how you walk, the different expressions, etc. But this is the young people's version of their glossary. I took 3 websites, I went to their glossaries, and then I threw out all of the duplicates. And if you are ever interested in seeing what the younger generations are calling different things, I went to GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. I went to HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and I went to PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And they all focus more on a younger population. The older adults are considered 50 and over. And for those of you who are 49, you have so much to look forward to. And it's based on AARP, quite frankly. Some organizations think 62 or 65, depending on what their grants allow them. But we kind of go back to 50. And quite frankly, at Sage Metro Detroit, we do 45 because we know that there are people that have partners who are younger than they are. But the difference between us back then and people today is about 110 words and growing. This was done several months ago, and so I'm sure there are even more definitions to be had. We've still stuck at basically 7 + 3. So I want to show you, I don't know whether it will come up. It might. Oh, good. I want to show you a movie. It's a 2-minute video that kind of explains what I'm explaining now.
As the American public ages, so do lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. LGBT older adults face the same challenges as other older adults, including financial worries and health concerns. But LGBT older adults face additional challenges. Let's compare 2 women, Tina and Jackie, who were both born in 1947. In 1967 at college, Tina meets Frank and Jackie meets Francis. On a date with Francis after work, Jackie is seen by a coworker who tells their boss. Jackie is legally fired and takes a lesser-paying job at a factory. In 1973, Tina marries Frank, but Jackie is unable to marry Francis. In the 80s, Tina and Frank have children, but Jackie and Francis are barred from adopting. After decades of hard work, in 2010, Frank and Francis retire. Tina takes Social Security spousal benefits. But because the federal government didn't recognize same-sex marriages then, Jackie is denied those benefits. In 2015, right before the freedom to marry becomes available nationwide, Frank and Francis die. Tina pays for her in-home care with her Social Security survivor benefits and funds from Frank's pension. Jackie is denied Social Security survivor benefits, and because she was not a legal spouse, is also denied Frances's pension. Their apartment was rented in Frances's name, and her state lacks non-discrimination protections in housing, so Jackie is evicted when she tries to change the lease into her name. Lacking an income and a place to live, Jackie moves into a nursing home and relies on Medicaid to pay for it. She fears discrimination if she shares stories about her past, so she doesn't talk about her life with Frances. Tina can afford in-home nursing care and has the support of her children. After a lifetime of discrimination, LGBT older adults face economic insecurity, poorer health, and reduced support networks. Find out more about the unique disparities facing LGBT older adults and how to remedy them, as well as the strength and resilience of LGBT adults at lgbtmap.org/older adults.
All right. I have no idea what I'm doing here.
So if you try doing the PowerPoint, there we go.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we give that, frankly, that people have an understanding in a very short period of time about intersectionality. Intersectionality was a word that was created by a woman who was an attorney. Her name was Kimberly Crenshaw. And it started in 1989 when she was representing 3 Black women who were senior staff at General Motors who had been fired because there was a recession. And Crenshaw argued that it wasn't just based on the theory, the policy at GM was last hired, first fired kind of thing. And because these women were the last 3 to be put into their positions, they were the first let go. Kimberly said it wasn't just a matter of them being the last because they were not qualified. It was that they were women and they were Black, and that the policy at General Motors was not to hire until later on in the 80s. And as a result, they were the last ones hired. The judge threw the case out saying that they could only have one aspect of them, and which was not part of that. Are you seeing my screen? Because it says my screen is paused.
Hi, Judy. Yeah, when you clicked from current slide, it just froze. So yeah, maybe try resharing and pulling up your PowerPoint again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just noticed that. And not that it really makes a difference from this current slide. No, nope, so still says stop share. Okay.
Okay, or maybe try clicking on the slide after it and then hitting from current slide.
Okay. Let's see. How about if I go to this one? How about that? Privilege and intersectionality, are you seeing it?
I am. You may want to X out those little boxes now. Perfect. I think there's one more at the bottom.
X out the little boxes.
Yeah, that might be when you clicked more and then hide the floating, whatever it was called. Yeah.
Hide the floating.
It's, yeah, hide the floating something. I think that'll get rid of that box.
How's that?
Now you have one little box in the middle.
That goes automatically. If you don't watch it, it just leaves you. So we were talking about intersectionality, and I often ask people, what words would you use to describe yourself? And things like mother or father, sister or brother, college graduate or teacher, knitter, crocheter, and all of those things that come together that form what we call intersectionality. We are a composite. We are a full line of all kinds of stuff. And when we are sitting alone in a chair at night, all of that stuff is kind of equalized. It's all a level playing field. My father was Christian, my mother was Jewish, and I was bullied early 50s. I lived in a predominantly Catholic neighborhood, and I was often chased home from school and called names, and they felt my head for horns and such. I carry that with me. I don't often think about it unless I'm giving some kind of a workshop. But I can tell you that when I'm doing a workshop for a faith community, it doesn't matter what they think in terms of judgment, because I've been invited, I hold the power. People have invited me to speak. But so I come out as being Jewish, and I'm fine with that. If I decide that I want to check out a congregation that's Christian, that may be more conservative, I would be very uncomfortable coming out as being Jewish. First off, I don't know why they would need to know, but also why put myself in a dangerous path or in a negative path of any kind? It's just better to be quiet. And it doesn't serve any purpose. And all of the things that you think. There are people that come into your life, and we talked, earlier on, I said, are there things that would make you uncomfortable? Telling your employment, or telling your income, or telling whatever it is. What's happened, though, is that sooner or later we start to talk about things, and we have to worry about sometimes not disclosing too much, enough so that we are accepted, or that what we're asking for is provided, or whatever, but not too much so that people are feeling negatively toward us in some way, and may then deny us what it is we're asking for. Okay, so if I am sitting and doing an application, providing information to someone as far as my needs, it's easy to see that I have a disability because I walk with a limp. It's easy to see that I'm an older adult, although I feel like I'm 23 inside. I'm certainly not. And my language is pretty much English. But until I disclose, you may not know my family structure, whether I live alone, whether I have a large family at home. You may not know until I tell you what my nationality is, if I am married or not. And certainly, unless you really are I don't know, my sexual orientation. And I will also suggest to you that oftentimes people don't know that they are talking to someone who may have presented initially as female or male at birth, and who is now transitioned. And because they have transitioned so successfully, I guess, they are able to blend into a general society and choose not to disclose ever again because the trauma might be too great. I have a friend who is still an activist, although he is a wonderful young man who doesn't certainly have any reason. He's in a committed relationship. He's actually married with kids and at a successful employment, etc., and who comes out as transgender whenever he's able to. And he said it's because people are shocked because he doesn't look transgender. Funny, you don't look Jewish. That kind of thing, that we only see people who have really certain characteristics that we identify with or that we have presumed to be, and we may or may not be right. So I often give people a test on how would you feel if you, from now until the end of the day, I asked you to change all of the pronouns in every conversation you had. If you're talking to colleagues, friends, family, whatever, instead of the he, saying she. It would stop you, first of all, I would suspect, from answering things quickly, because you have to turn things around in your head. Am I exchanging all of those pronouns correctly? Am I going to speak so fast that I make a mistake? And if there's an award given at the end of the day, I want the award. I want the, so I'm suggesting to you that LGBT people every day who are not disclosing are thinking about the pronouns they use, the places they might go, the relationships they might have, and all of that creates stress. All of that creates stress. And we know, and we'll talk about in a little bit, what stress can do. Just FYI, 9 out of 10 LGBT older adults have no children to care for them. We know that the #1 caregiver is the daughter. My daughter has so much to look forward to. And now I have 2 grandchildren. They too have so much to look forward to. But 9 out of 10 have no children to care for them, compared with 2 out of 10 heterosexual older adults. So the people that are taking care of older adults are usually older adults themselves. If you don't have your families of blood, of birth, then you have adopted people into your pod, into your immediate relationships that are probably your contemporaries. I would be hard pressed to ask any of my friends to get up on a ladder and clean my gutters. But I don't have younger people that I might call on. My kids live 500, 600 miles away. 7 out of 10 older adults live alone, compared with 3 out of 10 heterosexual older adults. So in the middle of the night, if something's happening, what do I do and who do I call? LGBT older adults are nearly 3 times as likely to live in poverty. And we saw that in that little 2-minute video that we just watched. Because of situations that existed back then, now we have protections in employment that did not exist then. But we still have lack of protection with regard to housing and public accommodations. So what do we do when people are living in poverty and they're seeking help and there's nobody that they feel that they can talk to? Chances are it's going to create some kind of distress. And I will suggest to you that based on the US Census Bureau, and this is from 2019, there are 1,729,983 Michiganders 65 and older. Now that doesn't go back to the 50 that I was talking about and older, but 65 and older. The Williams Institute and Pew Research do a lot of estimates because LGBT people don't come out often in terms of disclosing. And so they figure 3 to 8% of the population is LGBT and or T. Based on that, I took 5%. And if 5% are of this 1,700,000 plus, there are estimated to be 86,500 LGBT older adults in Michigan population, 65 and over. There have been a few changes for the better over the years. When I started, and I mentioned to you, in 2010, there was no protection. People could, in terms of marriage, or in terms of employment, or housing, or public accommodations, there was no protection. Now I can tell you that you could be sitting in a restaurant and the manager could come up to you and say, I don't want your kind here. You look gay to me. I don't want you in my restaurant. And for those of you who think that that's illegal, I'm sorry to tell you, you're wrong. Because in Michigan, we don't have a protection for public accommodations. If you were checking into your hotel room, someone could say to you, we don't want your kind here. You look gay to me. And you have no legal recourse because you can't prove you're not gay. You can't prove you're not gay. So when I talk to people and I say, this is not just an LGBT fight, it's not just for people in that population to fight for themselves, it's for all of us to stand up and fight, because it's just as easy for me to say, I don't like that person because of their race or their religion or their nationality, but I can't use that. So instead, I'll say, you look gay to me. I don't want your kind here. And you can't prove that you're not gay. Okay. Self-isolation and loneliness is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, problem for older adults. I have been doing a lot of research at the Administration for Community Living and at the National Institute of Health. And one of their divisions at the NIH is the NIA Division of Behavior and Social Research. And they have discovered that self-isolation and loneliness accounts for high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, depression, a weakened immune system, and poor cognitive health, as in higher risk for dementia. Also, an increased risk for earlier death. So if there's any reason, I can give you several, that people should feel safe and that they should feel accepted and just like everyone else. It's one thing to all of us feel that there are times when we are uncomfortable or that we feel an otherness. But the fact that some of us are unable to disclose that otherness makes all the difference in the world. I'm going to suggest to you that if you are in an area where everyone appears to be the same and you feel different, it's very possible for you to say, you know, I'm not a Christian, I'm Jewish. My father was Christian, but I'm Jewish. It will not necessarily take as much energy and have as great an impact as if you were to say to someone, well, I'm not exactly heterosexual. And because we've lived with our various traumas, we've heard of the horrible lobotomies and electric shock treatments. children being taken away from parents when they are discovered to be lesbian or gay. We've heard of all of these horrible things, being kicked out of your house, but also being evicted from your home for renting a home that is not Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae federally mortgaged. If it's owned outright or if it's locally mortgaged, that owner has unfortunately, every right to say, I don't want your kind here. And you can be gone. And you have no recourse. So what we're discovering is that LGBT people have a higher incidence of increased health risks, mental and physical health risks. We need to help to lower that. Michigan law, as I mentioned, prohibits discrimination based on religion, race, color, national origin, age, sex, height, weight, familial status, or marital status. Years ago, 2015, we were able to have marital status. So people thought, well, they've got it all now. The gays have got everything. They can now get married. I was at a gathering the other night with some people from another congregation, and I was talking about older adults and lack of protections. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, my congregation doesn't know this, but the man that I'm living with and I have been together something like 25 years, but we're not married. He and I both were widowed. We have pensions from our spouses as survivors, so rights of survivors, and it would be financially difficult for us to marry because we would lose those pensions. As a result, when they moved from New York to Michigan, they just never bothered to mention to anyone that they were not legally married. They've talked with their children, their adult children. They're both probably in their mid-70s, and they have papers that they have created with their attorney. And in the event that one passes before the other, everything seems to be covered, but they're not able to marry. In their eyes, they're not able to marry. I'll tell you that the same thing would probably hold true with a lot of older adults. As long as they've been together, they've never been allowed to marry, and now they don't see any sense in it. They have probably papers that have covered whatever their needs are, and whomever knows what their feelings are about certain things. They probably have medical powers of attorney, with each other, and financial, and a second person, in the wings in case there's a plan B. So the fact is that things are not as secure. Things are not as necessarily cut and dried as, okay, they've got it all. And certainly when it comes to public accommodations and housing. Recently, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Supreme Court decision. Amy Stevens, who was working for a funeral home and who was transitioning, lost her job when she started presenting female. And it was taken all the way up to the Supreme Court, who determined that gender should not be, that it should fall under gender, and that employment, it was illegal to discriminate based on gender and specifically gender identity in her case, in terms of the Civil Rights Act. So we were able to erase employment from the non-iterated, the non-enumerated law. However, we still have some work to do. So I'm Judy Lewis, and you now have 40 minutes to tell me what you think, and let me know if you have questions. And I'm going to stop share.
Thank you, Judy. That was very interesting. Really appreciate that.
Sure.
And I do want to invite everybody to ask questions of Judy. And we did want to make sure that everybody knows that these questions are anonymous. So nobody will be identified during this. So, so the first question, Judy, pertains to this issue of LGBT folks having poorer health outcomes. And you've been very clear in your talk about how disclosing that status can be difficult and fraught and can have bad outcomes. This is kind of a two-part question. The first is, do you think that older LGBT folks are showing the negative effects of having not disclosed to their healthcare providers at earlier ages, number one? And so therefore younger LGBT folks might be getting better care. And then the second part of the question is, how do we help healthcare providers to be more responsive and sensitive?
Thanks, Karen. That's why at the very beginning I said we need an army of allies. You need to come out to your primary care providers as an ally. Whatever else is up to you, but to come out as an army of allies and say to your care provider, are you LGBT inclusive? Are you, what are your feelings about LGBT individuals, period? I can tell you that my doctor, my OB-GYN, was very much aware of me and my history, etc., but he has since retired. I'm a 75-year-old, 74 for another 3 weeks, so 74-year-old woman, and I probably am still in need of a gynecologist. But if I were going to a gynecologist, would I be comfortable saying, hi, I'm a lesbian, how do you feel about that? I'm tired. I don't have the energy. I'm feeling vulnerable already because a lot of the strength that I had to fight back when I was 40, I don't have that strength anymore. Mm-hmm. I would much rather just not disclose and let everything fall where it might. That being said, if I was going to a new primary physician, an internist, and I didn't disclose certain things, I would be putting myself at some serious risk, mm-hmm. especially if I was transgender and I identified as male, but I had ovaries, mm-hmm. but I looked male and I transitioned completely. How would one know unless I spoke it? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the fact is that we need to talk to, and I have to also qualify, we live in a whole different kind of community. We live in a more contemporary, a little bit more progressive, and sometimes even though we don't think so, a progressive community. When you think about rural dwelling, or when you think about even on the other side of the state in places like Benton Harbor and Kalamazoo, they are not as progressive. We assume that younger adults are more progressive and that things are a lot easier for them. I'm going to suggest to you that I've seen the statistics on suicide, and I've seen the statistics on drug abuse and alcohol abuse, et cetera. And even though I work with a very small niche, actually it's not that small, we're 1 in 5, and we're going to be an even greater population by the time, 2030. But my niche is really 50 and above. Mm-hmm. Younger, older adults may use the word queer or the Q. Older adults use LGBT. And people in their 80s might even use GLBT, because there was a difference between then and the women's movement, where the women said, why do the guys always have to be first? Why can't we be first sometimes? And they switched it, and it caught on. And so younger, older adults are LGBT, but older adults are GLBT. I'm going to caution people that even though there are younger people that are coming out and saying, if they don't like it, let them hit the door. There are still quite a number of people that are not disclosing. So number one, you need to come out to your health professionals and to your providers and to your friends and family in some way by just dropping it into a conversation. My neighbor and her wife, or my cousin and his boyfriend, or even if you don't have a neighbor with a wife, those kinds of things, just so that you can, conversation starters, because that will lower the stress level, that will lower all of the things that go along with isolation and loneliness.
Okay, great. And the second part of the question, Judy, is, training for medical professionals now. Has your organization, or have you thought about that topic in terms of training, new physicians, obviously, but retraining or, doing continuing education for practicing physicians?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I've been very fortunate that we were invited by something called Superior Health. And Superior Health has thousands, from what I understand, staff and physicians that attend these conferences and these panels and such. And we just did, I did with an executive director from a community, an LGBT community center, as well as a community health organization that focuses on transgender health. We did a panel on data collection and on sexual orientation, gender identity, and why it's so important that it be a priority for each patient who comes to the office. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get some more folks who will say, you should have Sage Metro Detroit come and talk to you about, professional courtesies, about inclusion, about safety, etc. Because when I go to the doctor, I just recently went to my oncologist, turned out he'd retired. He left me before I even had a chance to say goodbye. And there was this gorgeous young man who was in his stead, so it wasn't so bad after all. But I said, by the way, before we go any further, I'm healthy and have been for many years, but so I want to know, are you LGBT friendly and inclusive? Because if not, I need to make other arrangements. I'm a lesbian. Now, I do this for a living. I don't know many people that would walk into a doctor's office and say, hi, I'm a lesbian. Are you going to hurt me? He, of course, said, I don't understand the question, because of course I'm inclusive. Of course I'm blah, 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 blah. And I said, then you need somehow to wear a pin or have a sticker or do something, put it on a laptop, put a rainbow sticker on a laptop, so that when I walk in, the first thing I see, because whether I know I'm doing it or not, I'm looking for a sign. I'm looking for something that's going to tell me I'm okay and that I'm safe. I'm, again, going to suggest to you that you can buy those things online, or you can get a whole 350 of them in a roll. Please see what you can do about coming out and making your providers come out. And yes, we are hoping that people will tell their doctor, you've got to hear these people talk, and you need to change some of your behaviors.
Great. Yeah, exactly. It could be in a mission statement or some statement about the values of the practice, for example. So great. So Judy, our next question has to do with how particularly federal research into health has tended not to ask questions about sexual orientation or gender identity. And that has made it more difficult for us to understand the health issues for this segment of our population. Is that an issue that your organization or you've thought about and have some thoughts about how to rectify?
We've been working on this for many years. We finally were able to get one of two questions, the sexual orientation question, into the census. And it was at a very difficult time, as we know. So we haven't been able to move much further, but it's constantly a question that we keep raising. I can tell you that I am working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. In fact, I just did a workshop for them where they are going to be allowing us to collect data from all of the area agencies on aging in Michigan for sexual orientation, gender identity. It will be a question asked of every applicant to the area agency on aging. And we think it's important. Years ago, we did, Sage Metro Detroit had a grant, and we did 3 area agencies in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties, and we offered options. We told one, put it on your message so that when people call, hi, you've reached the area agency on aging. If you or someone you know needs LGBT resources, please don't hesitate to let us know. If you need Meals on Wheels, dial 1. If you need blah, 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 dial 3, that kind of thing. We had one that only asked when they thought it might be appropriate. And we had one that would ask every client. The number one, and very significant results, the number one response and the most LGBT individuals who came out over the message. Hearing the letters, just in passing, it was just a quick thing. And only once did someone, a client, ask, what does LGBT mean? Mm-hmm. And the staffer said, well, if you don't know, it probably doesn't apply to you, let's move on. And then they moved on. In one case, we had a staffer tell us that she'd had 2 people who said, but it's an abomination. And I said, so what did you do? And she said, but in each case, she said, well, if it doesn't apply to you, let's move on. And she'd start to read the next question. The one of the 2 said, but it's an abomination. And she more sternly said, if it doesn't apply to you, let's move on. And then continued with a question. And it was never asked again. It was never stated again, because that person was there for service. And you don't want to make that person who's taken all of the information angry. Mm-hmm. So the fact is, the people that are in that seat hold the power. Mm-hmm. You know, if I'm coming to you, you hold the power. So I will suggest to you that if you are seeking to make a change with something and talking to your doctors or talking to your providers of something, of services, you hold the power. Mm-hmm. You're the one paying them to provide the service to you. Mm-hmm. As a result, you have every right and every opportunity to say, by the way, I was just wondering, how do you feel about this? My daughter has a problem supporting any person or agency or organization that is anti-gay. Mm-hmm. She knows too many people that have suffered and feels that she needs to put her support with people who have the same positive feelings that she has about being supportive of people in the population. Mm-hmm. She also feels the same way about Black Lives Matter and has a sign on her lawn, you know, and in Massachusetts, it's a whole different ballgame than it is in Detroit, mm-hmm. where I live. You know, I live in Southfield. So the fact is we have the power to do something. Mm-hmm. We just need to do it.
Right, yeah. Well, great. That's very helpful, Judy. Let me ask, the next question is a little bit lengthy. I'm just going to read it verbatim. So this one says, with so many words to describe a community of people who identify as LGBTQ among the younger generation, is it offensive to someone within this community if the wrong word is used? With so many words, how can one who wants to make all feel included be sure to not offend someone inadvertently? Are there websites that can help us to learn more? And you know, even the LGBT, adding the Q or not, is you've pointed out, is a generational issue.
Absolutely. We started out as GLBT, mm-hmm. then we went on to LGBT. Now, and then we went on to the younger people with LGBTQ. I argued that, you know, for my population, LGBT is about as far as I thought we should go. Our national organization, having done kind of a straw poll, if you will, has determined that because of the frequency it's being used, and also because it needs to start being branded and used more parallel, that we should be using LGBTQ plus,
Okay.
as opposed to all of the IIAA and all of that kind of thing. It could go on forever. And we don't want to dilute the message. So I would suggest to people that that it's LGBTQ plus. I am one of those firm believers, know before whom you stand. And since I can't see anyone other than you, Karen, and that's lovely, that I just stick with LGBT, because I know of people personally, my generation, my contemporaries, who have really been beaten up physically and emotionally and verbally by the Q word, and for whom it is a difficult word. So using the Q or Q plus actually softens the Q.
Okay.
Using LGBTQ plus softens the Q because it's not the last letter they hear.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Were there any other kind of resources that this person was asking about, websites or anything that you can direct her to?
The three that I suggested are really three that are very popular. That's PFLAG, and HRC, and GLSEN, GLSEN.
CEN. Okay, great. And you know what we'll do is we'll make sure we follow up with an email for participants with those websites.
Excellent. And again, there's a very strong difference between younger people and younger older people and older people. So it's really more know before whom you stand.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And we also have a question, Judy, about your availability of your slides. Will those be made available? Can we send those to our participants as well?
My slides really don't have all of the information, so I'm always hesitant, but certainly your viewers can watch this webinar, you know, complete with all of the information after this is over, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Okay, good. So our next question is also another lengthy one. Judy, and I'll just dive in. It says, it's a thank you, first of all. And it says, as a queer 67-year-old woman, I talk with my LGBT friends about planning for their future as frail elders and whether they would move to retirement communities to help overcome isolation. But they are less bold than I am about being out, and they are scared about being accepted. Can you tell us any success stories about people who do disclose when they move to a new elder community?
I told the story about the 80-year-old woman who was moving to a senior community, and she never disclosed. But interestingly enough, about 6 months ago, well, it was during the summer, I received a call from a diversity representative, a resident. They had formed a diversity group, and they wanted me to come to speak about diversity and how they could become a more open and inclusive population, and how they could show people that they were more inclusive. And we expected about 30 residents to be there. There were over 100 who came to this workshop that I did, and they've been having this conversation since then and have put books in the library on how to be an ally and how to come out as an ally and all of these things. So I'm going to suggest to you that where I couldn't offer you any place to go at one time, I'm going to tell you that there are 3 places that I could recommend now in the Detroit metro area. And throughout the state. PVM is a very strong supporter of older adult, LGBT older adults, and actually sits on our board. And they are statewide. and are even planning up into the UP within the next couple of years. But we can certainly provide you with information on older adult communities. The other thing that I will suggest to you is we're doing a survey currently on LGBTQ housing and asking people what they would want and where they would want it and what, what are their concerns, et cetera. And I would tell you to go to Kaplan at aclu.org and ask him if he can send you the survey. Have all of your friends fill it out, because the more input we get, the more information we have, the better we'll be able to serve the population. Yeah.
Yes, and Judy, so you've got your wealth of information, and we will do a follow-up email that has all of this. I have a few questions coming up right now about, how, can you post this information? We will send it, separately. So that's great. Yeah. The next question has to do with SAGE doing trainings in senior living complexes. Do you do that in order to help create LGBTQ acceptance? And kind of maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how to access that.
Excellent. We were given a grant through MDHHS, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. We're going to be going to 100 nursing home and assisted living facilities, talking with both the staff and then a separate workshop with residents and creating resident councils. We're also in the process of creating resident rights booklet that is both federal and state rights that we're going to be able to combine. Federal, as we know, supersedes state, but state supplements federal. So we're able to take all of that and empower, we hope, residents of all stripes, if you will, so that they'll be able to speak on their own behalf. I have spoken to places like American House, and National SAGE has come and done work with American House. We've also worked with PVM. We've also worked with, it was the Henry Ford Village, Allegria. Their new name is Allegria. And they're all changing their policy to be inclusive of LGBT older adults. So we're going somewhere. I mentioned the Rainbow Resource Guide. I believe it has housing in it. And I work with about 7 different collaboratives. And one of the realtors that I work with has signed a statement of inclusion that she will not discriminate and is accountable. So if somebody is interested in doing something in terms of selling their home or whatever, or buying a home, she would be the person I would refer you to. And finally, a lot of younger, older adults are still working on their finances and doing financial planning. And there is a tremendous man, Jim Spear from Spear Financial, who has also signed a statement of inclusion and who is very supportive of the LGBT community, who works with couples and singles on their financial future. So we really have come up, this was unheard of 10 years ago. These were things, but these are allies who have said, we're in the fight with you.
Terrific. Great.
Yeah.
Again, a wealth of information, Judy. Our next question has to do with the census. And, this person was asking specifically about, are we able to, find out something more specific about what % of the population discloses as LGBT? And I'm sorry, Judy, I'm not remembering if you said that that question was on the census for 2020 or was not.
No, the question about sexual orientation was on the, as far as I have been told, because I never filled out a census. It's almost as though, they picked people at random and let them represent, the population. I'm still not sure what that was all about. But it was a different time, and please God, we've moved on. But all of it is estimates. You're dealing with a population that is concerned about disclosing. So the only thing we can do is base it on what we know. And I can tell you that based on some of the studies done by HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and by MAP, the Movement Advancement Project is, but MAP, M-A-P, that they estimate that 5% of the population is LGBT, older adults, is LGBT. So we then are able to superimpose it onto things. Back in the olden days, it was 10%, and it was based on gay and lesbian, period. There were no bisexuals. When I was growing up, there were no bisexuals, by the way, everybody, because it was just commit. You're just afraid to commit. You need to commit. You're really a lesbian. You just don't know, you know. So the fact is that that we live in a whole different world today. And so when we talk about numbers, the Kinsey report, where it was 10% blanket, lesbian and gay, there was nothing else, was a whole different number than today when we're talking about estimates.
Okay, that's interesting. The estimate is lower now than it was then.
But they estimate that there is no county in the country that is without at least one LGBT individual.
Sure.
Which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, that's very, very fascinating. So we had our next question, Judy, is an intersectionality question, really, and it's has to do with the issue of gay people who are also Black, and kind of the particular situation that they're faced with in our culture. Can you just kind of respond to that one? Yes,
and especially people of faith have had a much harder road because of the importance and the power of the church, because their clergy stood in front of the church, and what they said became gospel. I had a young man who came to me who told me, and it was really interesting because I saw him 10 years later. I didn't even recognize him. But he came to me and said, his pastor used to bring him up to the front of the church, call him all kinds of names, say horrible, horrible things, and hold him up as Satan's disciple. And I said, what did you do? He said, well, I said, why didn't you leave? First of all, why did you keep coming back? And he said, because invariably people would come up to me on the down low and say, where do I find out more? Who can I talk to? And he was able to answer questions for them and give them direction. 10 years later, or probably a little bit more, I was at a Black Pride Festival. It's probably the oldest in the country now. And we were at the park, at Palmer Park, and this man came up to me, gorgeous young man, and said, you probably don't remember me. My name's Blessing. And how many people in your life have you known named Blessing? I said, no, you can't be. But it turns out he is a strong and vibrant and marvelous young man who is doing work in the LGBT Black community because he was the one that people came to, and it empowered him to be the voice for people who couldn't speak. It's a very difficult, speaking of intersectionality, only now am I finding with my work with the LGBT Project, which is predominantly men, older men, and I think I'm the only white person at the table, but they have free dinner, and it's once a month. And those are some of the difficult conversations, quite frankly. But it's having those conversations and them going back and having those conversations with family and friends.
Right. Yeah.
Very difficult.
Well, the whole issue of being a person who is othered and the stress that creates throughout somebody's lifetime, and what the health outcomes are related to that, of course, are better understood now than in the past. And so we've got a Black population that is experiencing stress in that regard, but also in terms of gender identity as well. So
there's a wonderful woman, I might add, who is a doctor, a psychiatrist, that I heard speak the other day on trauma and racism and transgenerational trauma. That someone may not have directly experienced the trauma, but it's almost a cultural or in the DNA telomeres, she called them, that it's carried forth from generation to generation. And I'll also suggest to you that if you're a person of color, you're already out. Okay, so just as if you're disabled I have a back issue and I have a limp, so I'm already out as disabled.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost easier. Okay, but to be a person of color who's also gay, it's almost as though you have created a situation for yourself because you don't know which one to focus on and what priorities to have. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. So Judy, our next question has to do with the unique circumstance of older LGBT folks with regard to isolation, loneliness, and suicide. Can you help us understand kind of that issue a little bit better?
We have at Sage Metro Detroit something called the Friendly Caller Program. And it was begun a few years back because we were finding that there were people who were retiring from work who had no friends because their friends were work friends. Mm-hmm. And so they had no, what we call community. I still dispute that word. And so they would sit in their chair and watch television and prepare to die. Mm-hmm. And in one case, a young man, 65, actually, I happened to run into him. I had no idea. He just happened to be someplace I happened to be, and we started a conversation. I believe in higher powers. So, and I suggested that he might call the Friendly Caller Program, and he started talking with someone. Then he went to affirmations and went to something called the Senior Coffee Klatch, which is an older adult discussion group that meets weekly. And then he brought his antique car to Pride Festival. And by this time, he knew he had a cadre of people. He had a group of people that he had dinner with. Now his father is ill, and I probably end of life. So he's kind of backed away. But here's a man who sat in his chair. He literally said, I sat in my chair day after day waiting to die because I had no choice. He had no family other than his dad. He's no siblings. And he was embarrassed about going back to work to talk to people that he was now retired from. Mm-hmm. So, and he had no idea what activities to engage in because he was gay and he wanted to be gay. And he didn't want to have to worry about pronouns or any of that kind of stuff. The people he had known had moved south for warmer weather or had died, and his partner was gone. And so he was alone. Mm-hmm. So I'll suggest to you, yes, I do know people like that. My work is exactly that, is beating the bushes and finding gay people and getting them engaged with each other. And then beating the bushes and finding providers for the gay people I find. So yeah.
So your job description is beating the bushes. I got it.
That's it. I'm a bush beater. There you go.
So our next question, Judy, has to do with transgender folks in particular. And it's a kind of a two-part question. And that is, has there been some more focus in the medical professions to have particular expertise in transgender, needs, essentially, including surgeries? And the second part of that question is, where are we in terms of getting insurers to decide that these are medically necessary procedures and they will cover them?
Two very sticky questions. So I will suggest to you, depending on where you live, Affirmations has a resource list of different physicians that are not only gay friendly, but trans friendly. I will also suggest to you that younger people, and have access to something called, I know the woman's name is Roz. Okay, it'll come to me about 2 a.m. She started an organization because her son came out to her and has transitioned, and somebody probably in your listening audience probably knows who I'm talking about. But older adults who have not transitioned and who are finally beginning that journey are not necessarily getting surgeries. They are identifying as their authentic selves. They may or may not be taking hormones. It's very expensive to have surgery. Many people don't have insurance. Again, we're going to that poverty and have taken the low-paying jobs so that they could at least dress authentically on the, maybe factory workers who may have been, higher earning people, but chose or were forced into jobs that were low earning. So there are people that can give suggestions and such, but there are also people that I know who have done nothing except to say, I identify as she and her, and that's, how they identify. And they may look masculine, and they may, not be on any surgeries or medications. They simply are being their authentic selves. And in their case, they identify female.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Well, good. Just in terms of role models, those of us who are Jeopardy watchers have watched this, Amy become hugely successful. And I thought she was fabulous in terms of just a wonderful role model,
Yes.
And how straightforward and, she was about her background. So that was
so important for us, all of us. Everybody is other in some way. It is so critical that we all come out as authentically as possible. And if there is a question or concern or curiosity, it's not, if it's curiosity, it kind of temper it.
Yeah.
But if it's, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask.
Uh-huh. That's wonderful advice. So Judy, we're starting to run out of time. I'm wondering, is there anything else you'd like our audience to be left with in terms of how we should be thinking about our LGBT community? Perhaps that's not the word you'd like to use, but how we can be supportive, how we can kind of move the dial culturally.
Sure. And Karen, the reason I don't like to use community is that we don't share a whole lot in common other than the fact that we're gay, lesbian, bisexual, and or transgender. Okay. So we are a population and we are everywhere. We're all different faiths and all different religions, all different races and nationalities, etc. So I would, the one and only ask that I always have, please come out as an ally and join the army of allies. It's a really neat place to be, and with a lot of people that really care about each other. And thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for inviting me here today. Thanks.
Yes. And if you have any further thoughts, Judy, about how people can become more active, organizations to join, or, other ways to, to support this initiative, please, send it to us, and we'll add it to the email we'll be sending to everybody.
Also, please tell people, jlewis@sagemetrodetroit.org. I am happy to answer any questions after this is over. And if they want to get involved, sagemetrodetroit.org. We have a website and they can sign up right there.
Wonderful. Terrific. Judy, well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. It's been very, very interesting.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.